Okay, so we got the chain and everything off of it. I want you to take a look at this cylinder here. If you focus in on a stand, we got a cylinder here that has a lot of water in it, and we've got rust around this area. I went ahead and vacuumed some of the crud out of there, but we may have a little bit of a problem with this because this motor doesn't seem to want to rotate. Sometimes these pistons get frozen in there, so if you see, I've got a wrench on this, and there it goes. Take a look at that cylinder there. We got quite a bit of rust, and turn that light on. We got quite a bit of rust on this thing, and so there's a possibility that we may have to sleeve this cylinder. It just depends on how deep that rust is and how deep those pits are, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it, once we get everything cleaned up. So these can be difficult at times to get to free up. That one wasn't too bad, but now the motor seems to be turning pretty good. There isn't any rust or anything in any other cylinders. So we'll go ahead and rotate the motor over now and look at the lower end here. I did try to pull some of those lifters off out of there off camera, and they don't seem to want to come out, so we're going to worry about that later. So now we've got our oil pump here. This is our oil pump in our pickup, and we want to get the bolts out of this and take it off. So there's two 3/8 bolts holding this pump down onto the motor, and they take a 9/16. So we just go ahead and break these loose and take them off. Some guys will clean up these pickup screens and reuse them. I don't ever do that. I just replace the whole thing. So when I take the pumps off of these things, I go ahead and take the pickup screens off. Man, there's a lot of corrosion on this thing, a lot of crud. So we'll get these bolts out of here. You'll see that there is an oil pump drive shaft that should actually be attached to the pump here, or will come out after the pump comes out. We may or may not reuse that. It just depends on what it looks like. They're only about $12 to replace, so we'll probably just go ahead and get a whole new pump and drive shaft in the works here, especially considering how dirty this thing is. There's a lot of dirt and corrosion. This motor looks like it's got quite a few miles on it. It does appear to be rebuilt, but I think they put a lot of miles on it after they rebuilt it. There's a lot of crud on here. It makes it hard to get these bolts out of this thing. So there's our first one, and we'll go ahead, get our pump off, and then we can look at our rotating assembly here. And I don't know, the lower end of the engine looks pretty clean compared to this oil pump. I don't know if they just went ahead and put the old oil pump back on here, because you can see the pistons and rods look like they've been cleaned and reworked, but the oil pump really looks very similar to the rest of the inside of the motor. So it almost looks like they didn't really spend a lot of time cleaning this. They just kind of re-ringed it and did a little bit of work on the bottom end. So we got this drive shaft in here. We'll push this up so you can see it. This is our oil pump intermediate or drive shaft, and this is the distributor actually drives this from the top and drives the oil pump. And there's your pump. We will definitely not be reusing that, so we're going to set it down here with our old parts that we would possibly need to match up. Now we got our rotating assembly here. This is the bottom end, and it seems like it's rotating pretty free. We don't really have a lot of crankshaft end play, so I'm pretty sure that the thrust bearing's not wiped out of it. We'll just go ahead and start taking these pistons out and see what they look like. In order to take the piston and rod assemblies out. We're just going to loosen those up. It's very simple. And go ahead and take them out of there. Get a couple of these rod nuts loose here. I'm not going to take all of these pistons out on video because that would just kind of be a waste of camera time. And so we're going to go ahead and just pull one of these out so you guys can get an idea of what this is all about. I like to break the nuts loose and leave a nut on there. I don't want to take it all the way out. And then I just take a hammer and I just lightly tap it. If you see, you can see how that split apart there. And then we'll get the nuts off of it. Now when you take these apart, you need to put some kind of protection on these rod nuts so you don't damage your crankshaft. You can use a couple of pieces of fuel line. You can use, they actually have little boots that you can put on there, journal protectors. I'm going to use this thing here. So you can see there's your bearing, and the bearings don't look too bad. They got some scratches in them. Now this is where you really discover what you're working with here. These bearings are marked. They will usually have a date and a size on them. So this is a Cleveite bearing and it says 10 thousandths, 0.010 undersized. So that tells me that the crankshaft has been reground undersized. So that's another indication that this motor has been rebuilt. And I really can't make a date out there. They will usually have the date stamped in them, but I can't make anything out. So we'll go ahead and set that aside. Now you're going to take your journal protector and you're going to put it right on the rod nuts. We want this to be at bottom dead center, because if it's not at bottom dead center, what happens, you drive it out and you see how the rod is hitting the block here. I'm not going to be able to get that out. It's okay to go ahead and rotate the crank over as long as you got your journal protector on there. And we want to make sure that we catch this piston. We don't want it falling on the ground or anything like that. So we're gonna drive this piston out. Now we've got our head gasket here, which is kind of interfering, but you just got to kind of work that off there. You can work your piston out through that hole. This head gasket is obviously coming apart on us. And there's your piston and rod assembly. Yeah, boy, this thing has a lot of crud and varnish in it. I'm pretty sure the bad gas caused that. These rings are really stuck and frozen in here. Although the pistons, if you look at them, they look like they've been replaced. We know that the bearings are definitely aftermarket bearings, and the crank has been reground 10 thousandths undersized. But there's your piston and rod assembly. Very often the pistons will have a size stamped on the top. Obviously we can't see that now because there's too much carbon, but we'll wire brush that off and see if we can figure out a size. One thing you always want to do is take your connecting rod cap and put it on. And remember, these bearing notches, there's a notch here and a notch here, they go to the same side of the rod. I don't want to put this cap on with this notch on this side. I want them both of the notches there. So let's put our cap back on, and we want to put the nuts back on it before we go any further. We don't really want to mix these rod caps up. Now the nice thing is that somebody has numbered these. This is number 1. They numbered the rod and the cap. But even so, it's a good idea to go ahead and put that cap back on before you take this one off. So that's piston and rod disassembly. I'll go ahead and get the rest of these out, and in the next video we'll start taking a look at this crankshaft and pull the crankshaft out and see what our block looks like. And so till then, see you then.